Okay, I think that we will get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining another UG2 webinar. Believe it or not, this is the 21st in the series. A really exciting webinar today, kind of a different format that we're testing out. We have a panel of 5 amazing people from around the country, sort of that focus on piloting and operations within the glider field. Really here to help answer any burning questions that you have or comments, and hopefully can sort of help shed light on some of these topics. This will be very informal as well, so if anyone else has any expertise to offer or any experiences or advice, we welcome that as well. So yeah, so thank you. Next slide. So as always, as the coordinator, I love to just give a good shout out to the steering committee that continuously works behind the scenes tirelessly to help move UG2 and our sort of action items and objectives forwards. So everybody's listed here. We're particularly busy now as we're moving full steam ahead with the workshop planning. So yeah, huge shout out to this group of people that volunteer their time to help progress the objectives of UG2. Next slide. Just a brief agenda for today's webinar. I have a few updates to give, so I'll do those first, and then I will introduce our panel of 5 people. Each of those folks has come up with a few top tips and tricks or advice to offer to kind of kickstart the discussion. But the bulk of today's webinar really is your time. So I hope that you've brought questions and can sort of ask those, or as I said, any other advice or experience to share within the community. That's the bulk of the time. We'll run for as long as we need to. Please don't be shy. This is a great opportunity to sort of, again, ask those questions and really take something away from this webinar. Okay, Cassie? So some updates from me. The biggest update I have is that, as I said, we are moving full steam ahead with the workshop planning. The workshop is scheduled for next May, USF St. Pete in Florida. It's May 18 to 20. We are planning to open registration in early January. So right after everyone gets back from all their holiday celebrations, please do keep an eye out for that registration form. This will all be shared through the Slack channel and also on our website. There is a dedicated website page now for the workshop. Registration will open, as I said, in January, and we usually leave that open for a few months. As always, there will be no registration fee. This is, free event to attend. And we will have a hotel block as well with limited capacity. So it's, again, sort of first come, first serve to kind of get your spot within that hotel. We will, as always, be offering some participant travel support. This workshop will be helping with hotels and flights. So I urge those of you that really want to come but need a little bit of the travel support in order to attend to please apply early. Register early and just indicate on that registration form that you do require some participant support, and then we'll be in touch to kind of work through that process with you. That participant support application does close earlier than registration just because it takes us some time to kind of work through the logistics side of things. That is not just open to students or early career, it's open to everybody, technicians, operators, and so on. So do look into that if you want to come but need a little support in order to come. But yeah, sort of watch this space as we sort of open up different sort of elements of the workshop planning, surveys and things. Yeah, we're very, very excited to be able to move forward with that. In some other news, we did have to withdraw the town hall we had at Oceans MTS next month for various reasons. So what I ended up doing is basically convert that town hall into this webinar. Basically, it's the same thing. We had a panel with some tips and tricks from pilots and operators. So apologies to anyone that's going to that was looking forward to the town hall. Just logistics wise, it wasn't working for us for this one. But in good news, we are attending OSM in Scotland early next year. We are running a town hall in collaboration with EGO, so the European group, and it focuses on underwater gliders in action, ocean emergency preparedness. So from our side, we'll be presenting on hurricane research with gliders and sort of the hurricane data that we can collect to sort of make preparedness easier for us. So yeah, anyone that's planning on coming, please do, again, look out for updates for that. They haven't released the schedule, but as soon as they do, I'll share that via our platforms as well. And then finally, we did release our first ever newsletter in July. I hope everybody received that. If you didn't receive it, you can sign up to that on our website directly. If you have any issues with that, then just send me an email or send me a message on Slack, and I can also add you to that subscriber list. We will have the next issue in December. And if anyone wants to be featured or has anyone that should be featured or a project to be featured for that upcoming edition, again, please reach out to me. We also in that edition have, jobs and events. So anything you want showcased in the UG2 world, let me know, and I can definitely work to include that in the December edition. Great. So that's all from me. I'm going to just start with some panel introductions. And I think, perfect. So the panel is all there, and I think if all the panelists could put their camera on if possible, just so everyone can see your lovely faces for the afternoon. And then I'm going to run through, and then as soon as I've done their introductions, I will pass over to the panel if they have any of those tips and tricks to offer everybody. So we have 5 fantastic people joining us today to share their expertise. Peter Brickley, who's a senior engineer in applied ocean physics and engineering at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Peter has 15 years of experience with gliders, glider fleet operations, and other autonomous vehicles. And since 2013, he has worked for the Ocean Observatories Initiative. We also have Jessica Leonard, who's a Slocum glider and instrument technician within Rutgers University Center for Ocean Observing Leadership, the RU Cool Lab, with a background in physical oceanography, and she works predominantly in the North Atlantic and Caribbean. Russ Miller, who's a California native who studied mechanical engineering at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. Apologies if I butchered that. Russ worked in rocket propulsion for a decade before moving to the University of Michigan and working as a research staff in ground robotics. He joined the Cooperative Institute for Great Lakes Research in 2011 as an observing systems engineer, and now develops and operates glider, buoy, and mooring platforms for Sigler, Gloss, and NOAA partners. We also have on the phone joining us, Anthony Gilless, has worked at the Naval Oceanographic Office as the Glider Operations Center branch head since May 2019. As branch head, he led plank owner efforts in the establishment of a new operation capability known as the Unmanned Sensor Operations Center. Spearheaded the transition to successfully transitioned glider piloting responsibilities for the deep water passive system and participated in several unmanned systems special projects. And then finally, Kyla Drushka, who's a physical oceanographer at the Applied Physics Laboratory, University of Washington. She leads the Sea Glider Service Center, which is part of APL's Integrative Observational Platforms Group. Oh, everyone's got lots of acronyms in all of those. It's a tongue twister for me so early in the morning, but welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on this panel. At this point, I will pass over to any of you who would like to volunteer some initial tips and tricks just to kickstart the discussion.
I can go first,
Thank you,
just to
Jessica.
get it going. Yep. Let me share my screen real quick. All right, so I'll keep it kind of short. I have three tricks here that we use across our lab. The number one being using mapping resources when we pilot. We tend to pilot off the New Jersey, New York Bight. However, we pilot in international waters in the Caribbean, locations that are not as familiar to us. And when entering those areas, sometimes there are a lot of resources on what's in the water, like shipping lanes, structures such as oil rigs, reefs, but sometimes there is not, and we have to build those out either from local information who we're working with or satellite products. So any way you can get information onto a mapping resource, we use Google Maps, is a great way to know what kind of water you're flying in. Another thing that sounds kind of obvious, but not everybody keeps, is an ongoing cheat sheet with common piloting commands and abort responses. It is a tad frustrating when a glider aborts at 3 a.m. and you might not be able to think as cohesively as you would be in the middle of the day. So having some form of reference instead of having to look in master data when you forget something helps out a lot. And then something that we do that can, I'm assuming isn't just, this is all for Slocum glider specific, that's what we fly in our lab. You might be able to use across different gliders is storing current, past, and future files. In the Slocum glider case, go-tos, YOs, surfacts, with a different file extension. So that SFMC doesn't take these files and put them onto the glider, but it's something that other people that might be piloting in your lab or you can view quickly. Say you transferred a file and you forgot what's on it on the glider when it's down under, you can reference this, or if there's another go-to, you need to send it in, say, 5 hours, you can build that out ahead of time and then remove the file extension when you need to load it onto the glider. That's all I got.
Amazing. Thank you, Jessica. And if anyone also has questions and needs to put them in the chat, I can also relay them to anybody as well. And then I will also mention that Peter is here as well because we have had questions come up about shipping logistics for batteries and things. And I hear Peter is very well experienced in in all of that. So if anyone has any particular questions regarding that, then please do utilize Peter at this point as well. Are there any questions right now? Either for Jessica or anyone else in the panel or just in general?
I don't have a question, but I agree with your tricks and also building on your second point of keeping a cheat sheet. I also have started sort of keeping like a running narrative every time things go wrong, or go weird, which turns out to be pretty useful, a year later when the same kind of thing comes up again and I can remember what happened, where it was, and what we did to fix it. So I just have like a 50-page running Google Doc that's searchable for all the things that come up. It's been really useful.
I feel like I should comment on that too, because it's a really common problem. Like, I think my group has spent a ton of time in after action discussions to remember what we did, what went wrong, try to record that somewhere. And for a while in my program, we're really into documentation to the point where it's almost not helpful. So you can't document everything. Like some stuff really belongs in a cheat sheet, not in a formalized document, because you're never going to go through those steps the same way every time, but it's important to capture that. And I think that's a common problem for a lot of people who do glider operations, no matter what kind it is.
I can add that here at NOC, we've got a sort of standardized template in an Excel sheet for deployments and recoveries. And not every deployment recovery is standard, but you can work off of that because there is, 80% of it's going to be standard. So we just work through the checklist until you've checked everything off, and If you know something's going to be different ahead of time, you go and modify that checklist in advance of the deployment, if you know of the odd circumstance. And then I guess additionally, we also pre-stock the gliders with essentially a mission that will work on every glider, and we sort out the details after the ship's left and after we're happy that the glider is flying okay. So we have the intended mission on board typically, but we're running a mission that just runs on every glider, so that while the ship's on location, we're just running a standardized mission that will just work every time, just to check out the glider on deployment.
I really think that's I've worked with groups that customize the mission. Sometimes you have to customize a mission, but I encourage I always use the stock mission, and unless absolutely can't be used, and encourage that, because it makes it very simple to just that mission works. You're just dealing with your parameters that are changing, and there's no confusion. It's complicated when there's a lot of different missions on a glider that might work. That could be the one you need to restart if you pick up the shift in the middle of the night and it's not exactly clear what's happening. I'll go. I tried to think of a few things. I made a ton of mistakes, and I'm trying not to make them twice or more times. And sometimes I do forget what it's easy to forget what state a glider's in. So I try to really clearly designate gliders that are in some kind of unexpected state. If I have a glider that looks closed, it is closed, but doesn't have vacuum in it, I will label a tape over the run plug, over the power port, so that I'll see this no vacuum in this glider before I power it up and do some damage. Or just Tuesday, I had a glider on deck in lab mode, and I'm very Slocum centric here. And I wanted to make sure that I got out of that before launching it. So I labeled over the wing slot as a way to final reminder. If I had forgotten, I would see that before I tried to plug in a wing and fix that mistake before it happened.
I like that, Russ. Try and make a mistake only once.
We also
Yeah.
use a lot of tape, labeled tape in our group. I can share some slides.
Yeah.
So this is super sea glider centric, because that's what we do in our group. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to highlight a few features on the sea glider base station. So we run software that's available, and we also operate a cloud base station server called seaglider.pub. And we're continuously improving the software. So I wanted to highlight some features of the platform that people might not know about. My number one tip is to run self-tests. Run them all the time, run them before you deploy them, run them when you're testing. And we have a self-test checker that highlights values that are out of range. It plots, your bathymetry coverage, it plots your motor moves. And very importantly, it links to all your historical self-tests. So you have a record of all the tests you've run. And if something weird happens, you can take a look and sort of compare it in context. Running self-tests also allows us to help you if you're having a problem, because that's sort of where we start, is like, okay, well, what did this glider look like before it went in the water? Ooh. We also have a dashboard that gives you a super quick view, which is very useful. I think a lot of people don't know about this because it's kind of hidden, and gives you a bunch of these colored tiles to summarize the status. And if you click on any of these tiles, like you have a comms problem or a voltage problem, this glider has a lot of problems, it'll take you to the relevant plot. So it allows for pretty quick troubleshooting. And finally, we have a number of tools to help with troubleshooting. There's these alert bells that sort of ring when you have a problem. And if you click on that bell, it gives you these text timeouts or text alert notifications. And I look at those all the time because they might just be little warnings that aren't glider, you know, that aren't going to shut down your mission, but they'll really mess you up. And those are sort of labeled on the dive table as well if you have alerts or critical capture files.
Great, thanks, Kyla. Anyone got any questions? Somebody must have a question. Don't be shy. You can either, jump off mute, or you can put something in the chat and I can relay that question.
Sean Beckwith here. I just had a quick question for clarification on Kyla, or just a little more info. The first slide had something about run bathy map. One of your checkpoints, something about bathy map.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what that is and what you do with it.
Oh, so the bathy map is the bathymetry file that's stored on board the glider. So it knows how deep it can dive in a current place. And
Okay.
so you only want the glider to carry the bathy maps in the area that it's operating.
Gotcha. Okay, that's
Part of
not
the
something-
self-test checker just gives you a map showing here's where your bathy maps are. So you know,
Cool.
sort of visually confirm that you have them for the right spot.
Gotcha. That's not something I'm familiar with the type of gliders we use. So, but yeah, it sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's handy.
Thank you.
Sure.
I was kind of curious how many people, you know, in the panel or in the audience have built their own interfaces for various purposes. I know it's pretty common in my group. We started with certain interfaces that we liked, and then we discovered that we needed information presented to ourselves in a different way. And so we had to sort of organically build up something that worked just for us, that might not be applicable to everybody else.
National
Sounds amazing.
Oceanographic Center has a separate interface that is sort of does a lot of the same thing that SFMC does, but it does some of the things nicer than SFMC. I find myself piloting between the two at the moment. And for those of you not familiar with SFMC, that's the Teledyne provided shoreside suite of control software. And we also have a suite of internal tools just to the glider group that have been developed that can, you know, in the UK, we don't have as readily available system for, say, sending text messages or phone calls. So we can get a phone call in the middle of the night for an abort. There's also fault tracking through Iridium connections. So if we find a fault in the field, we can track a fault, and then next time the glider, and we can date when that fault should go active. So when it gets back to the lab and we connect to Iridium, we'll get an email saying that glider's got a fault. Don't ship it until it's fixed, which is a cute one, especially for the gliders with long turns and sort of obtuse faults.
We have the same thing as Knox, just we jump between SFMC and then our own updated version of SFMC, and then a lot of internal things that we build as we need them. And something I've seen at other institutes is for mission specific, if they need constant updates, is getting almost like an email diagnostic from the flight and science with plots that get created every time the glider surfaces, which could be annoying if that's not something you need, but is really helpful if you need to diagnose on the fly and are not always in front of your laptop.
So this is Anthony from the Naval Oceanographic Office. So whoever the gentleman was that posed the question stole one of my 3 recommendations, tools, tips, etc. So, you know, here at the Naval Oceanographic Office, we have to be semper gumby, always flexible. Not only do we pilot gliders, yay, but we also do overwatch for floats, boo, drifters, boo, anything, and other instruments that are non-gliders, yay. So with that said, because we have so many different instruments that we do pilot or maintain overwatch, we have had to go to a singular command and control tool called the Unmanned Systems Interface. which is developed by the Applied Physics Lab, University of Washington. Now, I understand the Navy, you know, we may have more total instruments than an individual university or corporation, but perhaps with the explosion of technology, different types of gliders that are coming online, hybrid floats gliders called gloats that are kind of in a both category. You know, you kind of have to have some sort of singular command and control tool, or like the gentleman said, you're going to have to develop additional plugins, if you will. As the group knows, gliders, we use Slocum gliders. In the past, we've used Sea Glider or spray gliders. Right now, we're using Slocum G2 hybrids, which are G2 gliders with G3 pumps. We also have G3 gliders. We operate them worldwide. So not only are we looking at the TBD files and environmental data that comes from that, but we also are looking at short burst data coming from a variety of floats. All of that is integrated into a singular command and control tool for that part, and then a QC tool that's developed by government contractors. But in our case, we do have to maintain that flexibility because there's a lot of CRADAs that our operational commander has in place, and we're seeing additional sensors coming online that we're going to be operating, and integrating that all into a singular command and control system is proving troublesome, but it's at a level of agility we need. We can't have our pilots learning 5 or 6 different systems. It's got to be integrated in one, and that's the direction that we're moving towards. Hopefully universities and others that may pilot different types of instruments, different vendors, will migrate towards kind of a common command and control tool as well. Any questions?
Any questions for Anthony on that? I will also just mention that Sean popped a comment in the chat box as well that said that they've got several members based at USF that built a house web-based interface that's been very useful, and they use that in combination with the main mission control software for the Slocum gliders. And I guess Garrett gave a poster on this at the last UG2 workshop as well.
Yeah,
Gandalf
I
has
think
been-
it's sorry, I think it's still in the works, but it's you can navigate to the page. It's called the brewery. If you Google like Earl, the brewery USF, it should come up. But it is I'll note that it's still in progress, and Garrett is now doing other things with it actually at Teledyne for their purposes. So a future version is coming, I believe.
We work closely with University of Windsor, and they've just had some support from Goose with the Gandalf interface, which I think integrates quite a number of platforms as well, and has been support for that's, I think, been very forthcoming from its creators. Someone might be able to talk to that.
Nikolai has also mentioned as well the concept of Ocean GNS, and there's a link in the chat box for that too, which provides a platform agnostic mission planning tool to understand the mission environment and coordinate missions better with various other deployed platforms. This allows sharing of missions across various accounts, group, or user, and also has path planning tools to find optimal routing for underwater and surface gliders. So it seems to be a lot of tools being developed for that sort of integrated approach, doesn't it? Any other questions or comments from anyone in the audience or the panel on this?
I'll build on that. The online resources are awesome, especially for not as large labs or groups. But one thing that we have found going to other countries, specifically in areas where ocean observing kind of ceases to exist, and we might be the first ones there, is that like the best resource are the people in that area. A lot of times, the U.S. and Europe has really good coverage, but place we were working in recently, like the Philippines, doesn't have as much. But when we talk to the local lab and local fishermen, they have an abundance of knowledge on the area and things that we might not necessarily be able to see from satellites or documentation. That's super helpful. Something that we had a bunch of trouble with was fishermen were super active in the middle of the night and knew that this lab was there and definitely thought that they were losing our gliders when the glider was just in its active flight. So working with them to spread that the glider was meant to be out there and it coming to the surface was a good thing was something super helpful in piloting.
Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, I might call on you, Peter, or anyone else to talk a little bit about battery storage. We've had a few people write in before about leaks and then how to deal with that and sort of safely dispose of batteries as well. So if anyone has any insight surrounding the sort of battery supply, storage, safety, maybe the processes that you use in your respective labs, I think that would be very helpful as well.
I can speak a little bit to this. Just for context, my background is with WHOI, and we specialize in doing very long deployments, and we've done lots of coastal deployments for 12 years now. 470 something at last count. I kind of forget exactly, but that means we've kind of run into a lot of problems with lithium batteries. That being said, I'm not an expert. I have the sort of learned experience that a lot of people have who get into this business. Nobody really teaches you much at the beginning, right? I did throw together something on a slide. I'm not going to show the slide. I got to go find it though. So, I mean, one of the things you do need to keep in mind with lithium batteries is that the rules are, they're there for a reason. They can be very dangerous, right? In the United States, there are restrictions on how you can ship these things and who's allowed to ship them, and everybody who does so has to have the right training. And that training is not always easy to get. The agencies that are responsible for overseeing this, they don't have the people to check your math when you're filling out forms. They do have the resources to enforce the rules if they find out you've made a mistake, and you really, really don't want that. It was whole, I think like a lot of institutions, we have a safety management plan and we have a WHOI specific, and I think most institutions that do marine science have like a marine specific plan for how to handle lithium batteries around ships. Everybody who works with hazardous materials has to be go through a safety course. We have a special course at WHOI that's like a certification for people who will be shipping lithium. It's like a 4 to 6 hour course that it's one of the harder courses I've ever had to get through. And it doesn't really teach you everything you need to know, but it does give you a really good sense of what's involved and where the information you might need lives. And it gives you a greater respect for the people who do have to deal with this on a daily basis. So, if you're not familiar with some of those things, or you've never had to, make sure that you talk to the right people in your environmental health and safety institution, office, or department. There's often a lot more information available that you may not know you have. Things that we have run into that are maybe valuable here are, restrictions are getting, they're always increasing around these things. Accidents with lithium batteries are really quite bad. We've been fortunate not to have any that I can remember. We've had a couple close calls. Most of those have been around like leaks, where we've had a vehicle that's been damaged and it's taken on water, and you've got, a charged battery, and it's maybe in a foreign port where you don't have the full control over it that you might want. But you end up being responsible for either disposing of that or removing it or finding the right way to deal with it. And that's hard enough to do, you know, here in the States. It gets even harder kind of overseas. We have had in the past to, you know, cut open vehicles and remove the batteries and dispose of them just so we could ship back the parts, because we couldn't prove to anybody that the vehicle was properly sealed. We couldn't send anybody to the site who was trained or certified to do that, or more importantly, who was allowed to sign documentation to ship it. And those bottlenecks are really, really hard to solve. That happens in US ports, that happens overseas. This has happened 3 times in the last year where we've had to send somebody, you know, on short notice to somewhere else in the country just because they were certified to pack up the vehicle, sign the documentation, and ship it out. And like nobody on site was. You're offloading at a dock, the boat can't stick around, the port agent doesn't want to deal with it, there's nowhere to store it. And so you do end up in a tight spot sometimes. You know, in some ways, people in this group, I'm sure you've run into a few of these yourselves, and so maybe there might be a place for aggregating information about, you know, who's experienced at doing what in what location. I have on a few occasions been looking for somebody who could certify and pack up my glider and not have to send somebody. But, you know, again, you do want to be rather careful about how you do that because the downside of making a mistake are really bad. You know, I don't know what else I could talk about here, but certainly there's always more to talk about, and you know, we could save that for another discussion. Or I think the last time at the UG2 conference there was kind of some general undercurrent discussion about creating resources that were in one place so that people could go and search online for, you know, what do you need to know if you're dealing with lithium batteries, or what kind of concerns should you have. And I'll stop there. Again, I'm not an expert, so happy to answer any other questions that people have if I can.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes from, as you said, Peter, learned experiences and yeah, close calls and advice from others. So anyone have any questions for Peter sort of around batteries? Adam.
Oh, thanks for your insights, Peter. Is there a difference between you know, what you need in terms of certification to do shipping over air versus shipping overseas? Because my team has taken, you know, the IATA courses so that we can sign all the documentation required to say that our machine's been packed accordingly. But I wasn't aware that a similar type of thing might be needed for loading a glider on a vessel.
Yeah, this is where I get out of my depth pretty quickly, Adam. The certification that we've taken at WHOI, which I think is unique to WHOI, I think it was developed especially for us so that we could get through some of these bottlenecks that a lot of people at WHOI have had, being a big institution with a lot of people. We have a ground, air, and ocean certification for packing and signing documentation. But I honestly do not think that makes you an expert in all of those things. You know, we have a shipping department who are very experienced with that, and all of those people have to go and take a course in person. They might be able to update their certification online, you know, every few years, and they actually know what they're doing. So I think the best thing for me to do is not answer your question. and to you know, just make the point that there are limits to what I'm allowed to know, I guess.
There is a comment in the chat, so if they want to speak a little bit more on this, but apparently there is separate certifications for sea,
Yeah,
air,
I think
and
there are.
ground.
Yeah, I can speak to that real quick if you guys want. I've been shipping hazardous materials down to Antarctica, across the US and everything else for a long time. There in the US, there is DOT that you have to worry about for ground transportation. Air is IATA, and sea shipment is IMDG. For certification, the air is every 2 years. The ground, it can match in with that, and then the Sea shipment is 3 years. There's new rules for air shipments for batteries and hazardous materials every year that come up. So you have to know what the new guides are for that. The sea shipment rules are every 2 years they get new regulations. It is a lot to learn, and because they're constantly changing, you definitely want somebody who knows what's going on. And even though I've been doing it for a long time, I still feel like I have tons to learn on this. So the batteries and hazardous material shipping is, like Peter says, it's challenging, and it is something you have to be aware of.
I was unable to get rid of lithium packs until I found out that our university will just handle them in a way that I thought was not completely. I mean, they're handling them. They have a service that does batteries. I was very surprised they would take the large glider packs, but they did. I couldn't even get commercial outfits to quote me what it would cost to get rid of like 6 sets of lithium packs. So it's very helpful to get that. Shipping hazardous waste is completely different than shipping hazardous batteries. Different set of rules. And I wondered, but just for shipping the lithium batteries, do you all who do that regularly, do you use a service to, provide the 24-hour number that has to be available, or do you sign up for that on your own? I think Teledyne uses a service, uses an outside company to do that, to make that 24-hour contact for MSDS and all that available.
Yes, we use InfoTrack. So there's a couple different ones. InfoTrack's cheaper than what is the other one? There's a big company that most people use. I'll try to remember what that is, but InfoTrack's a smaller company in Florida, and what you do is you send them all of your SDS sheets as well as the battery test sheets as well. That's something else you have to use. And then they'll be that number that you have as a 24-hour service, and it's only like $250 a year. So for us, it's a no-brainer.
It's really helpful. Thank you. And thank you, Adam, as well.
There's a few links being shared as well in the chat if anyone's particularly interested. There's an online training link and then links to those hazmat solution companies, both in the US, and then there's one there in Canada that Adam has shared. Any other questions sort of surrounding batteries at this point, or any other advice anybody has, or any other learned experiences?
Got a quick note that my understanding is that the rechargeable batteries, the shipment is different between in equipment and outside of equipment. So you should learn those rules and understand them. And I think the concern is you can ship with a higher charge inside the equipment than outside. So I guess the point there is if you want to ship your rechargeable batteries to somebody outside of the glider, you need to discharge them first. And that could be difficult in some cases.
And I also had one more tip with regards to having gliders with batteries in them, and this is what I've been told from our local dangerous goods vendor or company. They said that if your batteries are within the glider, contained within equipment, and you're transporting them yourself, or with a vehicle that's part of your employment, that gliders can be considered as vehicles, and they'd fall under some exemption that the regulators have made for things like hoverboards and electric scooters and electric bicycles and stuff like that. And there's actually a big weight limit, and that usually falls, and the gliders fall under that weight limit for at least the amount of lithium content in the batteries. So it's just something to be aware that if you're doing just driving a glider from one place to another, We've been able to do that without needing any documentation, and this includes going on ferries and whatnot. So it's just an FYI that there's a really cool exemption there for things like hoverboards.
At least in IATA and IMDG, gliders are not considered vehicles because vehicles are something that you ride on, and you don't actually ride on a glider. So that maybe that's okay in Canada on the roads. US roads, they do have ability that, at least for us, I'm with the federal government, and federal government, we can transport them in there because they're under the US rules and under US things. I have not looked at for personal transport in, say, a work truck or any of that stuff. That's non-federally owned, so I can't answer to that.
I'm going to pretend I didn't hear you say that, okay?
He was definitely breaking up. I didn't hear him.
Another topic on well, if anyone has questions, go for it. But another topic on batteries, especially we've been really enjoying using rechargeable batteries. I learned with a different AUV system several years ago that the inspired energy packs that many vehicles use are they'll go offline if they're below charge. I have a nice example of one that has not been managed properly, and every single pack in here is dead. They'll probably all come back, but the voltage will look fine, and the charging current will drop to 0, and it will look like this is a full pack after charging, but half of these could be offline. So I always use the facility, the talk battery and the Slocum to check that each pack is actually charged. So I don't do what I did with an Ivor 2 one time and launch it with 4 packs out of 8 offline. It looked perfectly healthy, but it only had half the capacity I expected.
Any other questions or comments around batteries or anything else? As I said, if you have any other burning questions around anything pilots or operations or shipping, logistics.
Yeah, Georgia, Bill Lynch. Can
Yeah.
you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I was just trying to, why we had the pilots on, to get more on the operational side, if we could sort of open up a discussion a little bit on thought processes, like when the pilots are actually, when the gliders are deployed and they're having issues like if they have an unexpected dive profile, how do they determine if it's due to environmental conditions, i.e. thermoclines, currents, versus a mechanical issue with the glider itself? So I was just wondering if they could share some thought processes that they use to do some of that evaluation. Thank you.
Yeah, great question, Bill. Any one of our panelists wants to jump in to answer that?
I've got a segue comment. I just recently learned that some G3 users were not checking their BMS currents from forward, aft, and extended energy bays. So if you're a G3 user, you have the capability to make sure all your packs are plugged in. And I know there's a number of users here over the years who've accidentally had a tech or themselves have not plugged in a pack. On the G2s, you couldn't see that non-plugged in pack, but on a G3, you can absolutely see those. And if you're unaware of it, you should certainly be aware of that fact. I guess I'll take a first stab at answering Bill's question here. I think one of the first things we do is, is it repeatable? Does it keep happening, whatever you've seen in your strange dive profile? If it's a one-off, then sometimes you just wait for it to happen again and see if you can make some correlation between the two instances. We see funny things from time to time. Some of them are pretty quick. Sorry, a glider disconnected. I've got my headphones on and there's a big ding in there. So yeah, the one-offs are maybe hard to explain. It's when they become repeatable, you start looking for the trends as to what might be causing the repeatable issue, I guess. And making changes to see how the changes affect. So if there's a change in your pitch, is your pitch battery still affecting the pitch? If there's a change in roll, how significant, what side was there an event previous in the data that showed some sort of strike to the glider? We recently had a glider off of Greenland that had no roll essentially, and then went to 7 degrees on dives and 13 to 14 degrees on climbs. And I guess there's another tip and trick. That glider was unnavigable at standard settings, but we played around with dive and pitch angles and eventually got it to be able to stay on heading. And what I mean by that is that change in roll, which ultimately turned out to be a lost wing, was causing the glider to spiral on climbs and do sort of sweeping turns off heading and back on heading on dives, if I recall properly. And by adjusting the amount of CCs using for dives and the angle of the dives and correspondingly different CCs and climb angles, I think we ended up diving at 12 degrees with very little drive and climbing at 32 degrees with all the drive, and the glider was able to stay on heading with those settings and make forward progress and stay on mission essentially. Otherwise it was spiraling. So I will lower my hand and let people think about those comments.
Thanks, Ben. Jessica or Kyla, do you have any further insights?
Yeah, sure. I like to really sort of dig into it just to understand, even if there's nothing to be done. So I think as someone mentioned, looking at the stratification profile and trying to see if that maybe explains the strange profile. On a sea glider, at least, you can pull back a capture file that tells you, everything that happened during the dive, and that's if something goes sideways, and that's often the first thing I'll do is just pull back a capture file and take a really close look at everything that happened and see if I can get to the bottom of it. I'm also very careful every time something odd happens to look at power consumption, just to make sure there's no big spikes in power, that, a sensor didn't get knocked, or there's no suspected leaks, and you see high currents running through the glider that could maybe cause some damage or cause a short.
So both Ben and Kyla kind of, solving this, if your glider is not lost, leaking, sinking, still talking to you, solving a problem like that might take a couple days even, and you might have to send more parameters back. And and you can also jump on the Slack, and it's a good use the resource, use the community to try to get to the bottom of it.
I'll
Yeah, I think
add in, if it's not an emergency, if it's not boarding, if you know the area, if it's deep waters and you can adjust to fly shallower, just let the glider keep going. If it's safe to do so, having it float on the surface will, while you diagnose, especially if it's something that needs a lot, is going to cause more damage than not. But if it is emergency, then unfortunately you are on the clock, and just being able to have it go down in a safe fashion, even if it did abort, usually that means shallower, cutting power to certain sensors, whatnot, while you can problem solve.
I think a lot of Slocum users are probably already doing this, but one thing, and I'd be happy to share the list if somebody wants it. We have varying degrees amount of engineering data that we send back in the SBD list. So the glider engineering data, but we also have a fairly dense MBD that's being collected all the time that has a bunch of the variables you might want to look at in an unusual event. So we will send back an MBD list to troubleshoot, that roll issue, for instance. The first thing we did is we don't have a lot of roll. We could see the spiral, but we don't have a lot of roll data. So we sent back the MBD list and made some decisions off that. And then you probably, as you're troubleshooting over those couple of days that Russ mentioned, you might, increase the amount of data coming back in your SBD list to help the troubleshooting. I think I say these things, I feel like they're obvious, but maybe sometimes just hearing them helps reinforce that people are doing the right things, or runs, a new thought process through people's minds if you're not already doing them.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And I just want to reiterate Russ's point too, that sometimes other people have learnt the lessons the hard way and are willing to share, their insights. So if you do have problems that come up or issues that come up, the Slack platform is a really great place to kind of write those down and ask for help from the community. It's a great place to share those lessons and offer advice, and yeah, reach out, especially, new users and new pilots. Yeah, so please do use that resource. That's a general channel. There's also a pilot specific channel as well. So I do recommend using that as kind of a first port of call and see if anyone can offer insights and advice to you. Any other questions or comments around this topic, or anything else whilst we've got this panel here with us? Any other new users, new pilots in the audience that have questions or comments?
Yeah, this is Anthony from the Naval Oceanographic Office. So, unfortunately, our IA policies are locked down tighter than Fort Knox, so I have no video or no slides or anything. So I do have a new user question for the Teledyne rep that's online. Situation: glider is at 179 east, and I'm trying to head eastward to cross the date line, and my go-to list wants to send me the other way around the world. Our solution to that was to do a heading route to get across the date line. Was there a better solution for that problem set?
Okay, is there anyone on that's got experience with slocums, or I'm not sure if we have anyone on from Teledyne?
I thought somebody was mentioning all the tools, so I thought it was a Teledyne rep. Or
I used to work for
user.
Teledyne. I think you, having formerly worked there, I'm not sure that comes up much, but I think you did the right thing if you flew by heading. That's probably the right answer. So good job.
Great. Any other comments or questions for anybody?
Nikolai just put an interesting comment in the chat there, which is use the appropriate strength Loctite on the forward pitch back. And I guess until you see this more than once, it might be hard to recognize a pitch pack that's come loose in a slocum. So if you think it through, the result of a pitch pack that is no longer attached to the pitch motor is that the glider will dive properly and then has uncontrollably steep climbs, because as the nose comes up, the battery falls to the back of the pitch compartment and you have a steep climb. So if you ever see a glider that seems to be operating normally but has uncontrolled steep climbs, you probably have a loose pitch pack inside the nose section.
Add a bit of context. I'm not sure if anybody can hear me. I'm at an airport and I'm having a hard time hearing some participants, so that's why I'm using the Slack, but or the channel.
Yeah.
Okay, great. A bit of context. So the Slocum glider was assembled, and we did use Loctite, and then we drove it across Newfoundland, I guess on some bumpy roads, and then we deployed, and that was exactly what Ben described was what happened. So we recovered and then used more Loctite, and then the mission went well for 2.5 months with a broken digifin.
Thank you.
You know, more than once, we've run into little problems like this where we've completed testing on a vehicle, put it all together, did a complete functional checkout. And this is a Slocum, again, by the way. And then we shipped it, you know, halfway around the world, put it on a ship, drove it offshore, and discovered that something fundamental like the GPS cable was unplugged, right? But nobody noticed until it was in the water. And those sorts of things are terrifying. And they're uncommon, but it really makes you remember the next time to repeat basic functional testing every time you intend to put something in the water, and be careful about doing it. And that became like one of our, if we have a standard operating procedure, that's one of them that we always do, is we check all those things before we put stuff in the water. I think everybody does, but adding shipping and bumpy roads and all that, and forklifts, and those things really challenge you in new ways.
Launched a glider with the Science Bay power come unplugged somehow. So rule now is, we'll do a FCP functional test at the lab, and then after on deck, we'll always check comms. Yeah, I mean, you have to have comms. You want to check all of your comms modes. GPS, battery voltage is still looking okay. Vacuum is good. Your actuators, your wiggle, instruments to the extent you can, at least if they're making files, and then you may not be able to see that they're reading appropriately in air, but they're doing something. And that's pretty quick. It's not the full functional test. It only takes a few minutes, but that gives me a lot of confidence that things are going to work right once it's in the water. Does anybody, I was thinking about risk management. Do people have, do organizations have risk management communications methods that they use with this NOAA small boat program? There's something probably adopted from the Coast Guard, which is called the GAR form. It's a green, amber, red, sort of a team communication method for assessing environmental and resources and crew, capabilities, and looking at risk, looking at mitigations, and comparing that to the potential gain from the mission. We haven't implemented this formally for autonomous vehicles, but it seems like it would be a good idea. Does anybody have a system they use?
NOC does this where every project at the beginning of the project at least has a risk assessment done by the project lead, and they try to come up with all the risks and mitigation factors and scoring system for how big of a risk and how important it is. I could share one of those if people are interested and want to contact me. It's an internally developed risk management system, I believe, but it's essentially a grid.
Yeah, we did something similar at OI, but then, we've continued to operate at basically the same sites for many years. So that risk profile gets modified, but we haven't had to redo it because we did have to redo it when we moved one of the arrays. So I guess I should probably go back and look at that, but it sounds fairly similar to what Ben is talking about.
This seems like there's potentially a best practice there. The way the NOAA folks use it, the small boat operator the operator in charge will go through that risk assessment with everyone on board, come up with a number before embarking the mission, and hopefully be updating that. And as well as the initial one that Ben talked about, this gives you kind of a community assessment of what the things hazards you might be looking for on the day, and as you evolve through the mission. And you know, if you you've lost a wing, now you have maybe a different assessment of ability to complete the mission and recover the vehicle, and that sort of thing. So some.
Jessica, I'm wondering if Rutgers has, I feel like you guys have lots of deployments and lots of different sites.
We don't have an official form for risk management of the actual glider. We do use float plans for people going on board and safety of people on different vessels, since we use so many different vessels, just making sure somebody back home is in contact with them. Whereas, yeah, for the vehicle, I would say it's more of an informal internal discussion if something goes wrong. Luckily enough, we don't have too many incidences where something drastic is going wrong, but say when we're flying around windmill fields and whatnot, there's a much more bigger conversation happening every day, making sure that usually with the company or like, for example, we were working with Orsted, and there were daily reports where pile driving was happening, where boats were operating, where the glider was flying, and that becomes a lot more intensive in comparison to just seasonal surveying.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Any other comments or thoughts at this stage on anything to do with pilots, operations, logistics? We've got another 10 minutes or so.
I have a couple of tips that I haven't shared yet, and we've already talked about one of them. So it was about battery performance and endurance and making sure that's visible. I'm just going to skip that because we've sort of already talked about that. I'll just be repeating good information that has already been shared. I had two. I'm going to share my screen here, and apologies if it takes a minute. It's a slide deck that I haven't. Let's see, where is it? Here it is. So it's 96 slides. I promise I'm not going to show. I'm going to show two. I'm not going to show the rest. So this, I was looking at like tips for operations kind of from a macro level instead of a micro level, because I figured there's some value in that. And we do this a lot in my program because we've done a lot of deployments. Some of them are long. And like one of the things we run into is you never have enough information, right? And you can't always diagnose a problem without sending more of it back. But there's really a lot of value in going back to look at your older deployments and aggregate some of that together. It helps to minimize subjectivity. And one example is we've had issues with communications where, like, we've got vehicles up in the high latitudes off the coast of Greenland, and the weather up there is terrible, you know, half the year. So a lot of things impact your ability to communicate and to maintain a link that you've established over a satellite. And that could be ballast, that could be fouling. You know, Erminger Sea, there really is no problem with fouling, so we're kind of a special situation. But weather is really common, what mission settings and whatnot. And sometimes you end up in a bad place where all you can do is sort of shrug and say, well, we don't know what's going on, but it's having problems. And you can't really figure out what it is without actually being present. We have found that the connection logs for a slocum actually have a lot of information that's hard to extract. You know, you can look at these things in real time, you can look at them one by one, but if you really want to pull apart a deployment's worth, you really need some tools. So, you know, in the course of trying to understand this, some tools were written, one of them by Stuart Pierce, who's one of my colleagues at Oregon State. I don't think he's on the call. And actually, I didn't tell him I was going to share this, but it's a fully shareable thing, and we wanted to get it out there. It's a tool that he built to parse all of the slocum connection logs and sort everything into categories so that you could see what was the glider doing when it dropped a call. Was it in a mission? Was it out of a mission? Was it a commanded drop? Was it transferring data from the flight computer? Was it transferring from the science computer? And out of that, you get a bunch of statistics. And we found that to be kind of informative because it removes that speculation so that, you know, I can show with some statistical confidence that a glider that is in the Erminger Sea that is dropping 40% of its calls, I'm pretty sure that's weather because we've seen that a number of times. More than that, something is wrong. So I was going to, you know, offer that as a tip or a tool, really, and I'll put it in the chat in a minute. And the other one was, well, we've already sort of talked about it, but it's really about using vessels in various places and the importance of communication between people on shore and seagoing folks. You know, we've used, I think I counted like 47 different boats over the years, and some of them have been really our partners that we work with all the time. And we think we know how to talk to these people, and they think they understand what we're talking about. And there are so many methods of communication now. I mean, there's, you know, pick your favorite. We use Slack a lot where I work for everything on research vessels, but we still do a lot of cell phone, you know, satellite texting with our thumbs sometimes. And gliders have been around now for 20 years. There are people who look like me who've been using them for a long time, and there are people who are much younger who are used to using emojis, right? And this is just a thing we have to deal with. And maritime operators span generations and cultures, so it's important to kind of keep that in mind. But it's also important to remember, like, to be specific about what you mean. And we found it handy to have like a communication plan for every deployment we do, and almost a set of run rules, like who's going to do the operation, who's going to be at the keyboard, who's going to be communicating with the vessel, and what responsibilities do they have. And we start out deployments with that kind of assignment. And we've had issues where, you know, people who have worked together for 10 years, who can complete each other's sentences, will still make a mistake, like the one that's in the chat that I put on the screen. And I've removed all the names for anonymity, but this is an event that actually happened where somebody said, in response to a text message, they said, "Got it." And it really depends on what you mean by the word "got" and "it." And there was a miscommunication that happened like that, and it resulted in a mistake. We've had very few of those, but they're, you know, it's something that you really need to consider if you're going to do this a lot. So I'll stop there.
Did you get that one back?
We did. That was a fairly recent event. And as I said, we've really not had too many of those, but yeah, we got it back.
We did that in a Shimmick pond once with 2 gliders in the pond, and we shut one down in lab mode with the piston retracted, and the other glider was recovered. So it sank to the bottom of a Shimmick and was recovered the next day, but it was a long 24 hours.
You know, I don't need to get into the details, but I will say that if you own a Slocum glider with a 350 meter pump, it will function at 600 meters. Just saying. Don't ask me how I know, but I'm just saying.
Thanks,
Actually,
Peter.
Peter, I can add one to your list because it's a tips and trick that I picked up from you guys that we've not implemented and I regret. I think you are making sure that the aft battery does not roll or contribute to roll and shift during shipping, etc. Are you still using brackets for the aft battery with success?
We had a special little tool that we made to secure the aft battery in a slightly better way. Is that what you're talking about? And
I think Diana showed me that
Yeah.
you're maybe you're screwing the aft packs in so that they can't shift. I think
Yeah.
what we're seeing is we have a fairly deep ballast tank, and we can do a test dive in the tank, and we're regularly ballasting quite well with less than 1 or 2 degrees of roll, typically less than 1 degree of roll in the tank, and then gliders will get into the field and they'll have as much as 5 or 6 degrees of roll that's unexplained unless you say that the pitch back in the back is not secured at 0 all the time and can shift in shipping, which I believe is the case.
Yeah, I think that's we're talking about the same thing. There is a little, it's actually like a custom 3D printed part that was designed and has been used. And that's the intent, is to prevent any movement at all. And I didn't even think to include that as a tip, but I probably should have.
I think
certainly
for
shared
anybody,
that, I think, with a few people already.
With anybody in the group that has deployments that are roll critical, I do believe that the batteries can shift and contribute to roll significantly. So, and the lower the H moment, the worse it can be.
Yeah.
So we use zip ties just on where the pins go in and try to fashion them in a way that the battery can't really move, which isn't foolproof, but usually works well enough for us on a moment's notice.
Zip ties
Yeah.
have saved so many deployments, right?
Zip ties and duct tape, I feel like fix everything. I do just want to highlight as well, there's some great tips being shared in the chat as well. Nikolai's mentioned something about, being part of appropriate groups and channels, things like in Facebook and stuff, to get in touch with fishing boats if it's necessary. And then there's another comment there about using, not to use thruster together with auto ballast at the beginning of a mission, wait until the glider is well ballasted and then turn the thruster on. So just a few comments there just to sort of highlight those and make sure they're not missed by anybody as well. If anyone else has any of their own personal tips or tricks or anything or experiences, please do share them in the chat as well for everybody else. But we have just a few minutes left, so kind of last chance to ask anyone any questions or any other comments for any of our panel. Now's the time. But I will mention that we are planning to have a few sessions at the upcoming workshop, again, sort of focused on pilots and operations. So if anyone has any thought on those or topics or comments they really want to see covered during those breakout sessions, please start thinking about those and sort of let us know as well, by email or Slack or something, as we sort of keep this planning process moving forwards for the workshop. This is the last call for questions or comments if any of the panel have anything sort of final to add. Okay.
I can expand on Russ's entry into the chat here, and it's something that we do in our missions. So the G3s have a massive displacement pump, and it's been a concern of mine since day one of those pumps, because we flew them in a Shumat pond, which is quite shallow, that if you use the full drive on your first dive and don't get a good altimeter hit, you can drive into the mucky bottom with enough force to get a glider stuck overnight or for several days, potentially, hypothetically. So all of the missions at NOC now have an initial dive drive setting of a appropriate value for G2, G3 to fly at a normalish slow speed, not the possible fast speed of a G3 with a massive displacement pump. So you can just put that argument straight into your header of your mission for the total number of CCs and the first dive for auto ballast, and then it can pick up from there. So if you're not doing that, I'd highly recommend it. It may not pay off now, but it could pay off in the future, and it doesn't affect you much. And it saves some energy, and it's, I think, the right thing to do.
Thanks, Ben. It looks like Russ's comment is a learned experience. So
It is a very learned experience. Couple nervous hours there waiting to see if the weight would pop or the glider would shake itself loose. But 500 cc's, that's not even the biggest pump, was too much for 12 meters of water.
Fantastic. So any last questions, comments? Yeah, and there's lots of links that have been shared as well. So if anyone wants to grab those links from the chat, then I encourage that as well. But I think at this stage, if everyone's slowing down, then I just want to say a huge thank you to our panel, to all of you for taking the time today to answer questions and share your insights and your expertise. Again, as I said earlier, do use that Slack channel. It kind of goes both ways. People need to ask questions, but we do also rely on community members answering those questions. So, you know, if you see questions come up or problems come up on Slack and you have some answers to those or some advice to share or can at least point people in the right direction, then we do also need that side of the Slack channel as well. So please do help out anyone from that side as well and asking questions. I will share, or maybe Cassie, if you could share the link to the Slack in the chat for everybody. And you can also join Slack and the newsletter directly through our website as well. So I do encourage you to do that, especially as we gear up for a workshop next year. Lots of information gets shared on Slack as we lead up to that time, and also during the actual workshop itself. We do lean on Slack a lot, you know, to sort of share things that are happening and different things. As always, if anyone has any future webinar topics that they want to see highlighted and showcased, again, please reach out to us. We want to make these as useful and beneficial for the community as possible. And then again, same sort of vein with the workshop as we start the planning phase. If anyone's got topics they really want to see covered, questions they need answered, breakout sessions that they want to bring in to moderate, we are looking for those suggestions and volunteers sort of now, really up until you know, the workshop itself in May. So this is a community event. We do want to make it useful, and we also will rely on the community to sort of volunteer and want to moderate sessions and chair sessions as well. So just keep an eye on the website for updates coming for that, and the Slack channel for updates on that as well. And then our next webinar will be probably the end of October, and it's the second in the series of the Early Career Science Spotlight. So Joe Gradone, who's our Early Career Subfocus Lead for UG2 and based at Rutgers, will be moderating that session as well. So I encourage you all to join that once we sort of share the save the date for that as well. But it looks like the end of October. And then we'll have one more in December, believe it or not, as we somehow wrap up a year already, which is crazy. And then, yeah, just a final reminder, if anyone has anything to be included in the newsletter in December or wants to highlight their research or anything, again, please do reach out to me regarding that. But with that being said, again, a huge thank you to our panel. Really appreciate your time and willingness to be involved. And thank you to everybody who's asked questions and shared different tips and tricks, or you know, just hopefully you've walked away with something useful from today. We'll hope to do more of these sort of more informal discussion formats in the future as well for this webinar series. Yeah, have a wonderful rest of your week, everybody, and a great long weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bill Lynch.